Ṣẹ̀kẹ̀rẹ̀ lọ bá jó, ṣẹ̀kẹ̀rẹ̀ lọ bá jó, Olúwa mi ò dìde ojó ṣẹ̀kẹ̀rẹ̀.
Hello and welcome to Theoryforge. I am Phantom X, joined as always by Diggs and the legendary Neurotoxin. Thank you for joining us on the end of your weekend here on a Sunday. We are joined by a guest, a special guest, Joppa Perkins, creative director of Pantheon, has kind of came to join us to just talk about development, I think in general, but also of Pantheon, of where we are. And I try to convince some of the group on some of my members here, Diggs specifically, of why we should play Pantheon. Chris, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. It's been 5 years since last time I was here.
Yeah, I was about to say that. This is sort of unusual.
Not a time like that.
Yeah, we sort of have had kind of, I don't want to say one-off discussions. We've had other developers on a few times, but for you, yeah, it was, for those who haven't watched us, just a quick background. We've been doing this since 2014. It's about 6 years now. Started with Everquest next, but along the way have sort of branched out and done other things. And it was April of 2015 that Joppa was with us and actually talked more so about, I think, music and mmorpgs, but also Pantheon. So this is very different because we get to see you 5 years later and Pantheon 5 years later. Which is kind of cool, actually.
One, I just have to say I was not prepared for how Brady Bunch this feels. Even just him looking down as he sets his cup down, it makes it very
just look into the camera.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
I'll also say we're a little unusual for those who haven't watched us before. This isn't necessarily going to be some question by question interview, tough, questions. We like to just have conversation, basically. So
I think there will be some tough questions, but I think there will actually be some interesting answers. And I'm surprised by prepping for this discussion. I started watching some more recent gameplay, and I was a skeptic. I've been a skeptic, pretty hard skeptic for 5 years, which is why it's like, why even do a show? Because I'm probably not going to play this game. And primarily because it's too close to vanilla Everquest. It feels like it when I look at the combat. Looking at recent gameplay, there's some interesting concepts. I'm not sure that I still want to do the combat, but there's other stuff that I'm interested in that we'll get into. And actually, I really did like the Pantheon Rise of the Fallen logo. This background that you had up, Phantom X, that was pretty cool looking. So even the branding is pretty cool.
Yep, it's definitely had quite a bit of a facelift, and that's kind of a good, just kind of general way to talk about the project. Is that a lot of people forget that Pantheon started even before I was here as a crowd-funded project that didn't meet its original goal, and therefore, from the very beginning, when we talk about like funding, we talk about what we've had to work with resource-wise, and it's very iterative, very, very iterative, and we can get into more detail of that as we go along. But you wouldn't think of something like branding or logo to be part of that, but it very much is. And recently been able to see a nice facelift on that. But we can get into that more detail later. But glad to hear that you've been able to catch more.
Yeah. So actually, I'd love to know more about your kind of history with RPGs. Like, what first got you into RPGs? What way back, and kind of your RPG philosophy. And I don't know how you got connected with Pantheon, so I'd love to hear of your background.
Sure. Yeah. So for me, it was my love for RPGs began with some of the original console games, I guess you could put in that category. So, and I would say just my love for games in general came from just feasting on games like Legend of Zelda, Super Metroid, Mega Man, Final Fantasy, Secret of Mana. These games that I would spend just hours and hours and hours and hours of my childhood, not only playing, but then in the backyard pretending and, getting friends together and drawing them in school and, coming up with new Mega Man characters and like that whole world. And
my childhood too, apparently.
yeah, man. And it's still very
It could
fresh.
not have been my childhood. That's depressing. No, keep going.
But then I guess like RPG wise, a little bit of pen and paper stuff like came into that. I know my brother was big into D&D and got me my first monster manual and, introduced the whole world of miniatures and, kind of things like that. I still remember out there with the black spray primer, getting my miniatures ready to paint. And so that kind of was introduced. But really it all came to a head with Everquest when Everquest launched. And I think it was the first of its kind for me in terms of this idea of being able to create a character and become a character. I mean, I have these kind of embarrassing memories of like, a yardstick that I like taped up the bottom of it and made like a sword out of it. And I remember literally just listening to Everquest music and like becoming, in my basement, like the paladin that I had created. And that sense of being able to like take ownership of this character and lead this character and guide this character and be this character in this virtual world with so many other different people. And the way that, you just drank like adventure in, you drank knowledge in, experiences in, discoveries in at that point in time, because it was all so new and so fresh. And that first sense of this kind of unbridled virtual world, it just had an unbelievably deep like mark on me and resonated with me very much.
I'm going to interrupt you real quick. One of the things that I loved about Everquest, so I was working at Activision when that came out, and Jens Anderson, who's the creative director for Dcuo, was working there at the time, and he was the one who told me, Diggs, you have to play Everquest. Everybody was playing Ultima Online at the time, and I wouldn't play it because I'm a Care Bear, and there's way too much PvP, and you can imagine game devs and PvP and how that was going down. But what I loved about jumping into Everquest initially, where I was, the early mobs were kobold pups, and I was running past, and one of them just clobbered me while I ran past a temple, ogling a temple or something like that. And so I was like kill on sight for kobold pups and kobolds for years after that. But what I loved about it was the kobold pups would howl, and I would literally orient where they are by sound. So I'd run through an area and hear them yelling and like pan around and go, I'm going over there. And just that added element of the auditory and being able to do that kind of sensory navigation was so completely new for an RPG. Like it really immersion really felt real with vanilla Everquest of all things, which seems crazy now looking back 20 years later. But at the time, and the graphics at the time were pretty stunning.
Oh yeah.
I mean, for what was available. So it really did feel like I was, navigating through a D&D world at the time.
Maybe you should have been there for our first show and music and sounds.
Well, it's funny too, because the other piece of that, what you're describing there was the statement you made about not only was it was it new and exciting and interesting and immersive to be able to orient yourself and another entity based on the sound, but it's just your comment of, okay, I'm going over there. So this, I think what made EverQuest so uniquely impactful was also the maybe more so than before, because to go back to like you know, you probably in D&D campaigns you would have these experiences quite a bit. The fear of death, the fear of consequence, the fear of a wrong decision. Um, but in all the games, at least for me that I described leading up to this point, a game over was not fun, and in some cases, a game over was frustrating. But EverQuest was the first time it introduced this idea of being gripped almost by fear of either like a deep respect for something. Like I'm going over there because I don't want to get anywhere near this thing. First time you see a hill giant, and hear those footsteps, it has a big effect because you don't want to die. And you recognize your weakness in your place in relation to this massive entity that lives in this world that's much bigger than you are, that is untamed. And I think that's the other key too with EverQuest is it introduced this idea, and I think it's held true, and it's certainly one of our major kind of defining tenets is that tension, that level of tension is so necessary to creating a world that is exciting to inhabit. I think when you as a player, we talk about player agency a lot, and there's lots of different facets you can discuss that topic with, but the more you give players a thicker and thicker buffer between this world as a whole, whether it's the NPCs or the environments or whatever it may be, the thicker you make that buffer between like death and consequence and risk, I think you start losing a tremendous amount of the heart and the spirit of the game and the soul of the game. And that's one of the things we're really excited to bring back, and not just bring back, but really, kind of almost in this kind of Renaissance type spirit, like say like this kind of game, this kind of metric deserves a prominent place in the genre. It deserves a prominent place in like game experience. So I can go on that for a long, long time.
I actually wanted to get your opinion on something then. I feel like what was Project Gorgon? I don't know if they changed the name at some point, but that one had kind of an interesting sort of thing where everything you did, you get experience for. Even if you failed and got turned into a cow, you could level up as a cow. If you died constantly, you'd get better at dying. You'd be able to do more stuff as a ghost. So I felt like that was kind of like the inverse. It was, instead of there being a penalty for exploration, a penalty for failure, it's that you open up a different avenue of gameplay for a moment until you kind of restore yourself one way or another, or settle on whatever form you've kind of come back in and just kind of play with that for a while. So that's kind of one of the things that I wonder about is, on one hand, to be able to make the experiences where there's a lot of tension and there's a lot of danger to it, but unlike a D&D campaign, that's being curated by a dungeon master. They have the agency to say when and where monsters occur, and they could be rolling dice to determine whether there's an encounter or not. But even in that, it could be whether they're ready to ambush you, whether you ambush them, you stumble upon them, both notice each other at the same time. There's an opportunity to just sneak by. There's a lot more consequences that they can apply, even if they just kind of trust the die rolls for what the encounters are going to be. So I feel like that's one of the elements that, it's almost impossible to replicate in an MMO sort of environment unless you actually have something where, I don't know, I guess the world is somewhat responsive to players in an area trying to complete an objective of some sort. But what do you kind of think about all of that in terms of like players being able to explore more and try things and it's okay to die versus definitely you got to be very, very cautious with what you do because there isn't someone watching you over your shoulder to make sure like the encounters are fair for your level or whatever.
It's a good question. I think one way you can respond to that is one way I could respond to that rather is if you take that too far, and I don't mean too far in a negative sense. I just mean once you've taken that beyond a certain point, I think you're really starting to potentially shift into a almost a different style of game. You think of something like a roguelite type game where there's actually impetus, there's encouragement, there's incentive to die, even though you're trying to get as far as you can. And I love those games. Hades is a great example. It's a wonderful game if you haven't played it yet. But so, and that's what I mean by not saying it's not a negative. Like that's a very powerful game experience. Um, but I do think that invariably it's going to whittle away. It's going to cause you to see death in a completely different way. And so the question really becomes: is that the way that you want death to be seen? Is death an opportunity? Is death a pathway to greater advancement? And I think you could. I mean, it's funny. This actually, we're talking about this because this came up not too long ago. In that, um, I've been for some time intrigued by the idea of if you take something like World of Warcraft's death penalty, or even what I've seen in Crow Falls, where you kind of have this different form that you take on, and you come back to your body that way, but it's very passive, it's very disconnected. You're just traveling. Um, but if death was something, there was another, I can't remember, was it a Conan game where you had to like fight your way out, or there's some game, I think it was a Conan game, where if you died, you had to fight your way out to like kind of get back to your body. And the thought was just, it'd be actually kind of cool if when you died, you had to fight your way out, but not just as this punitive, like tedious exercise every time, but there was actually like a unique kind of experience you could get in that state, and unique equipment and unique things that you could actually progress and advance to where that became easier and easier, but also that opens the door to later content releases, even expansions, all themed around whatever this realm would be, where now actually like that's how you access that realm. And then whatever you're accumulating item wise, ability wise, level power wise, whatever it may be, that it becomes this whole new point of content. So, but again, I would say and I'm not saying that's something we're planning on doing. I'm just saying it's an idea. But uh, the more you take something in that direction, the more you embrace that, then I do think that it can risk having a negative effect on the overall sense of danger and sense of risk and tension. But you bring up a good point too, because the higher you crank that knob, then you and this is where we're trying to look at our death penalty carefully, because Pantheon is so deeply about exploration. It's so deeply about discovery. And if the game is tuned in such a way, and death is so severe that you can't actually do that, then we're kind of working against ourselves. And so I'm calling that something that is just a part of the development process as we get further along, and um, something we're watching carefully. But it's a really interesting discussion.
Yeah, I think this is kind of getting into who's playing, who the specific audience is, because the MMORPG audience is so massive.
Yeah.
um, and I'm a casual player. What do I say? I'm casual, challenged, hardcore time. Um, so I'm primarily playing for the story, the exploration, and hanging out with other people who are other characters, other players who are playing characters in this world with me. I want to see what they're wearing and the decisions that they're making, and hanging out with them. To put two of the things you spoke about recently together. One of my favorite memories in vanilla EverQuest was playing a halfling druid. I was out adventuring and I'd come back to town. Well, I was coming out of town, I think, and right at the gates were a party sitting down, medding, and I healed them. I healed them up to full, and said, "Good job of the dead. Did my good deed. Now I can go back out and explore some more." And I turn around and I bump into a pair of something knees. And I look up, 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 and it's an ogre or a hill giant or something, and it one shot kills me with one slam.
Mm.
Like, but just even the mechanics of that, just tilting up to say, "What the hell is this thing?" Was awesome. But that's an awesome story. It's an awesome memory. It's one of my favorite memories in an MMORPG. And the risk of that wasn't really a factor, and the penalty of that was not really the factor that is gripping me. But again, I'm in it really for the story, not for the game aspects of it. And so that's really, and I will say that I jumped from EQ to WoW because World of Warcraft in so many different ways was just easier to play. I mean, graphics wise, exploration wise, like moving from zone to zone was much more fluid. So many ways. So that ease of gameplay, for me as a casual challenge player, is kind of what I'm looking for. But again, that's the audience. So if you're going back to a EQ audience or a UO audience, then they're probably going to like having death penalties that are stronger and more meaningful and more risk versus reward type stuff.
Yeah, there's a lot I could unpack with that too, but I don't want to just keep getting on these long.
That's why we're here.
No, we rant.
We have as long as you have.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so, but you said that Pantheon is about exploration. So, in what ways? And we should at some point bring in the perception system, which I just, or perception mechanic.
Can I real quick? Can you hold that thought? I just on this death penalty. Just my own 2 cents. We did a show about this couple. Actually, I think that's what you saw, Chris, was we were talking about that. Yeah, because I was kind of comparing Pantheon's community versus Ash's community and how they see death penalties. For people, and I assume everyone that's taken the time to watch us and you have also watched this video on YouTube, but you did a panel at PAX. It was, I think, the future of MMORPGs or something. And so I've always been in this point of, I don't mind death penalties, but then I get internally worried about, well, how do we keep a game population up, right? That always becomes my point of view as well. If it's too rough, do you drive people away? I've listened to that PAX show actually a couple of times now, and you kind of made some really good points about, and digs what you just said about the size of the community of MMORPG players, how many there are. That listening to that panel and you talk about, well, there really is room for everyone and every little, we have so many different types of MMORPGs right now that are on the horizon and going to come here. That sort of after watching that panel, it kind of calmed me a little bit in this idea of, it's actually okay to not target, I don't want to say everyone because that's not my idea, but to make things a little bit more tough. And I know with challenge, challenge is one of the 3 kind of things you guys talk about, immersion, challenge, and community. But anyways, I just wanted to throw that out. That panel kind of changed my viewpoint a little bit. So if you haven't watched it, I'll link it in the YouTube and stuff. But
that's games in development. That's not games retaining players.
Where it changed my viewpoint and what Chris had said is that there is opportunity. Well, the communities are so large, and I guess there just is this opportunity now to extend out and try so many different things, and you don't have to worry so much necessarily about that. Being a WoW killer. You have
to retain those players, and like I said in the last show about Shadowbane. They were trying to go for we play to crush. That was their slogan, I think. And they were trying to go for this hardcore PvP crowd. And they didn't last very long because they couldn't retain enough players to do so. So you do have to figure out what your niche is. And it's fine to develop towards certain things, but we have to actually get them out and see if we can retain the players to know if these audiences can sustain the actual concept. But because I hear all the time complaints from the hardcore PvP crowd that there aren't any games really that are there for them, and there's a reason for that. NWO tried to cater to that crowd, but they had to change. So I'm just saying there's a lot in development, but we have to see what happens once they release. Yeah,
and I think that really is one of the main points to make, is that the toe dipping syndrome, where you're trying to you're trying to please every single demographic because you want to maximize the amount of players that you appeal to. That is not a wrong mentality. Like at the heart, I don't know of anyone who's genuinely creating something who would genuinely be able to say, like, I don't want everyone who would enjoy this to enjoy this, and I want as many people who would genuinely enjoy this for what it is to enjoy it. But that is the danger, is when you start trying to compromise certain things that make what you're making what it is, to try and get as many people over the hump as you can, because inevitably you chip away at enough things, and all of a sudden you don't have a clear shape. You just have a smoothed over, just kind of blob that is honestly what drives me a lot, is how jaded I had become with MMOs by, I guess, 2012, 2013, because there was so much sameness, so much repetitive sameness in the experience, in the process, in the 1 to 10, 1 to 50 end game. Like, it was all so similar, different settings, a few differences here and there. But the question is really like, what's it going to take to make something that actually feels fresh? And I do think there are a handful of games in development right now that seem to be driving towards that same place of, like, okay, we have so many years now of experience behind us, games that have come out. Like, how do you actually take these things and not only make it fresh, but really, like, what's the path of evolving the things that were actually successful into an experience that is good, is fun, is better. And so to back to the point, though, I think there are certain things that are more or less alienating. Certain decisions that you can make to be distinct and that are distinctive to your game, that are more and less alienating depending on what it is. And I think the handful of games that I referenced all have kind of their things that walk that line of, this could be significantly alienating to a large portion of people. I think and what's funny, for example, one of the things that I actually respect about Ashes, and how one of the tenets, that they have a death penalty, because, again, to me, a death penalty doesn't have to be like, the point of a death penalty is not to be like overly punitive. The point of the death penalty is to get you to respect the world and respect the things that are happening to you. And it's just amazing. Like, even in our internal testing, or some of our pre-alpha tests, whenever we have turned death penalty off for testing sake, it it's so different, how people play, because you just make totally different decisions when you're not concerned. And so, while I think that how far you turn that knob of severity can get into some seriously alienating uh, area, I think I do think that having a death penalty is one of those things that I believe can come to be embraced and valued by a player base, even by those that didn't necessarily know that they valued it before. Um, and I think about that, when you look at some of these console games, like even something like Dark Souls, and how much of an imprint that has had, and how that validified like insane challenge. Um, and granted, like we're talking about, a console game, and there's a limit to kind of, I guess, the penalty, or the damage that the personal damage you can take when, if a boss kills you for the 10th, 15th time. But at the same time, it's that willingness to keep throwing yourself back at the same challenge, this insatiable desire to overcome. Um, that's part of really what we want to capture, and that's why I say, like, the death penalty is something. Consider the death penalty something that has several knobs attached to it. That dialing the severity, dialing, you know, um, it's if we see it becoming something that is, when you consider the tapestry of Pantheon, something that's starting to detract from the other pillars and tenets, like exploration, discovery, like, players being able to um, more easily find one another. Um, don't hear dungeon or raid finder in that statement, but um, ways to facilitate um, not diminishing the meaningfulness of travel, and a world that needs to be navigated and needs to be respected. But there are several knobs that I think are very reasonable to tune, um, that maintain risk, maintain tension, but don't alienate beyond the purpose is not to alienate. That's
Yeah, there comes a point where because for me, again, I'm talking as a casual challenge player with hardcore time, so I'm willing to throw my head at the challenge and defeat the challenge as long as it's not too debilitating. So at some point, it's going to become so debilitating that I'm going to get pissed off and say, "Fuck the challenge! I'm going to go do something else." And it might be, fuck the challenge, I'm going to go play some other game. It might be, I'm going to play WoW instead of this because it's just easier to play. So yeah, I mean, I would say for me, death penalty, have one. It's part of the challenge or whatever, and then it's a matter of degree. But definitely,
Mhm.
there's going to come a point where, because as it's like with experience debt or something where you're adding time to my allotted gameplay or what I want to get out of this gameplay session, that's going to start to bug me because I usually go in thinking, I want to gain X amount of experience, or really, I want to get this skill in X amount of time. That's probably what I'm ramping up to. But I have not heard what your pillars are. So, how many pillars do you have? What are they? And then I'd like to get into some of the concepts of exploration and discovery as it pertains to Pantheon, because I'm primarily an explorer. So,
Yeah.
what are the pillars?
hmm all right. So the main pillars are, as Scott referenced, those are going to be our immersion, challenge, and community. Those are kind of the main three pillars, and from those three flow, kind of our tenants and our actual game systems, and kind of the different design goals and systems. Um,
Well, you started by saying exploration and discovery were your pillars, but those weren't in the three that you just listed.
Exploration, discovery. So this probably is going to sound convoluted because I'm saying this verbally instead of like looking at more of a visual depiction. But when I think of pillars, I think of three, and that would be immersion, challenge, and community. Our tenants, or kind of um, our constitution, if you will, is what ultimately flows from those pillars. So if you think of the three pillars, you would have multiple tenants on each pillar that kind of flow from that. And then as that serves as our overall game design philosophy and the philosophy that's driving the game that we're making, you should be able to look at a system, a gameplay mechanic, a feature, and like follow that back to one of those tenants on one of those pillars. That's kind of the idea. Um, would love for us to eventually have, on the new site, a nice visual depiction of that, because I believe it's very important, and it's just a lot easier to see it than explain it out loud. But um, so it'll be a little messy as we talk through this, because I don't yet have it all kind of right in front of me in my mind. But
I'm gonna try to help you out because I have some.
Sure.
You mentioned immersion first,
Yep.
and I have questions for I'm gonna save my my character creation ones for a little bit later. But immersion. When you mention immersion and Pantheon, the first things that I think of now that I've watched some videos over the last week are the perception mechanic and what's the other one? It's dispositions. Is that a thing?
That is a thing.
Yeah. So those two are the first things that I think about that I'd love to hear more about. Especially dispositions kind of seems like a kind of story bricks, which we are looking forward to for EQ Next. But having NPCs having different dispositions is a concept that I think we need to be striving towards more. So I'm glad to hear that that's. I will probably back Pantheon just for that mechanic, whether or not I play it or not. But I would love to hear more about perceptions and dispositions and how they connect to immersion.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and you guys feel free to interrupt me and stop me at any point if you want to add to any of this or whatever. But so we'll talk dispositions first, because I think we can more quickly just kind of encapsulate that idea. Where it was born, what it was born out of was, again, that the power of hindsight to look back over all the MMOs that we've played, and the fact that at some point you are eventually going to have done an encounter, or run an instance, or moved through a dungeon so many times that it becomes a Groundhog Day syndrome kind of experience, where you just know these are the possible things that can spawn. This is the pathing that these things do. This is all, the loot table of everything, and you just learn it. Now, one of the things which I'm sure is going to come up at some point in this conversation, but one of the things that naturally breaks that up is open world. Because when you're in an instance, it is very much just a rote, pre-designed, curated experience. Even if there is some variability built into it in terms of like, the types of spawns or things having different chances to spawn and whatnot. But when you introduce other players occupying the same place, then you introduce the possibility of unforeseen events. Like, player gets in trouble, they start running, they run, somewhere where you don't expect them to be, and all of a sudden now there's 2 or 3 more NPCs as part of your overall kind of encounter here that you're dealing with than you anticipated, and it automatically changes things. But in addition to that, because while that's true, it also doesn't account for enough variation or enough potential for variation that we were content to say that that's probably enough, because it's too rare that happens, especially in dungeons that are lower population at even just that time of day, for example. So Dispositions was born out of this place of, okay, how do we more organically change that up, where players are needing to be aware and constantly aware of the fact that every time they go to a new area, there could be NPCs that spawn with unique, not just unique like traits, like this one has more strength or this one has more resistance, but unique behavioral aspects.
I'm going to interrupt real quick because you said new place, but it could be old place, right?
Anytime they go anywhere.
Yeah.
That's probably the better way to say it. Yeah, good distinction. It's not a new place. Like the first time you go there, there's a chance. It's like this is kind of woven into the entire world. Less or so at lower levels, just as a part of that kind of onboarding experience for new players. Don't want to throw too much right out of the gate, but by level 10 certainly, and potentially a little before that, certainly the first time you visit your first dungeon, like the first dungeon, wherever those kind of dungeons that are designed to be that initial dungeon experience in the different parts of the world, that will definitely be a place where you start to see these things. But around level 8, 9, 10 or so, as far as the worldwide population, you're going to start seeing chances to see dispositions and encounter those. And the unique thing about them is it's a behavioral layer for the NPC. It is a unique way of the NPC to act or behave or respond that you have to learn and then you have to contend with. And one of the examples I like to use is the pyrophobic disposition. So, Halnir Cave, for example, or some of the deeper parts of Amber Fate, or some of the other places that we just haven't talked about or shown yet. Especially when you get into the deep places of the world and dark places, like you're going to encounter a much higher chance of encountering a pyrophobic disposition, which is going to give you certain benefits and advantages towards those NPCs, but it's also going to cause them to do a few different things. For example, that NPC could cower in fear, and that could end up being something you can use to your advantage. That NPC could also run away in fear, and very quickly, very easily get the attention of some of the other NPCs in the area you didn't want them to. It could even cause them to enrage, and kind of a fight or flight, situation where they end up actually kind of getting stronger and coming at you. And the cool thing about pyrophobic is that it's not just a fireball. This could be a campfire. This could be a torch. This could be, if you as a player have a burning effect on you and you get, close to an NPC that's pyrophobic, it's meant to be very deeply woven into the actual. One of my favorite things that I can't wait for us to show is, as a ranger, for example, if you fire an arrow through like a flame and it alights, then that's an opportunity to, whether you have like fire arrows or not, you can use the environment to catch your arrow on fire, stick it into an NPC, and then boom, all of a sudden fire is present and that pyrophobic disposition kicks in.
Fire is present after you stick it into the NPC, not before. But
oh no, like as soon as it lights, it's considered a burning.
The way you phrased it,
well,
came out funny.
yeah, it's once they ignite. No. So anyway, that's and so you'll find some like that are meant to be more a little bit just kind of maybe the right word for it, less like combat specific. We have another disposition, cunning, which if something has the cunning disposition, then they are very, very resistant to any kind of mind altering effects. So charms, mesmerize, mind control, things like that. And then they also are able to kind of snap their allies out of that. If an ally is mesmed or charmed, then they can break that on their allies. So several examples of different dispositions that are designed to create this unforeseen, unpredictable variability in the experience, and then to incentivize players to deal with those things. Then a slightly altered loot table as well, so that there's or an enhanced loot table, we'll say, so that there's incentive to actually dealing with these and taking these things out.
And are dispositions always negative from a player perspective?
They're not always negative. No, in fact, certain dispositions. Thinking for one, for example, that we don't have a name nailed down for it yet, but the premise of it is that it's an NPC that's easily turned essentially to, fight for you, and so that's a less positive disposition on the NPC side, but it's one that you can actually much more clearly see and take advantage of as a player. And then certain NPCs or certain players even have, like the Paladin, for example, have abilities that actually allow you to take advantage of things like that, where you can turn an NPC into a friendly NPC for a short period of time, and then actually utilize that to your advantage. It's a big part of how we're building the combat systems and the gameplay and the class play, is to provide as many different secondary and tertiary. Again, going back very much to a lot of that D&D heart and soul and spirit of like more unique ways, instead of these one-on-one direct combat paths, to change and alter and experience an encounter to your advantage or deal with the disadvantage through creative ways. It's exciting.
That's really
Yeah,
cool.
I'm talking a lot. I'm going to let you go. Is that, and this is why I'm saying again that I'll probably back just for that concept itself, because I want developers who are actively working on these concepts, so that even if this game folds or when people start moving on to new games, whatever, they have the experience necessary to more quickly implement these in future RPGs. One of the things from Story Bricks with EverQuest Next that I had been thinking about, it was, and I don't know that you can do this in Pantheon, but again, hopefully in later games, stuff like this will happen. If you have aggroed these NPCs because you've stolen their idol, if you return it, they're like, okay, you return the stolen stuff, we're good to go. We're not, because I'm not a big combat person just for the sake of combat.
Mhm.
So, and I'm looking for ways to get out of combat. So I'm going to let these other guys speak, but I do wonder if there's social skills that can get you out of combat in Pantheon, because that's one of the things I do like about D&D. But Neuro and Phantom, talk.
I actually wanted to know if dispositions are something that will sometimes apply to players, either for achievement or some of them for a death penalty. Like if you die to, a red dragon just incinerating you to death, you'll come back with the.
For a while.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, for
so I could see, is that the sort of thing that would actually apply? Or then also I could see cursed items, like it's a magic item you don't realize until like you get hit by fire and you start cowering. It's like, wait a minute, am I pyrophobic? And you have to go to the scryer and they look and it's like, oh, yep, you're cursed, buddy. Sorry, gotta destroy that sword.
Get rid of that thing. Absolutely. And so the answer is yes, that is actually planned. And the deeper thing to say about that is that the reason it's planned is because it's part of an overall goal, which is to make sure that everything that our NPCs are capable of and everything that can happen to an NPC is also reciprocal to the player. So that has lots of implications. It has implications like what you're describing, but it also has implications on, when you see player abilities that sound really cool and really fun and really deep and complex, and then have lots of synergistic properties that can be capitalized on by other players. It's the same with NPCs as well. And so you're going to see the hope in that is that it's going to be a very deep combat system, both from the player side towards the NPCs and the encounters, with all the different abilities and environmental traversal and secondary, tertiary effects like we were talking about earlier, but then also the kind of synergies that players are capable of, which we talked about just scratching the surface on the shaman stream we did not too long ago, but NPCs being able to capitalize on all that as well, and being able to sniff for things like that. So an NPC sniffing for like a burning or a fire effect, that they have a wind base or an air base effect that can fan those flames and kind of cause that to get even worse for the player. That's the kind of stuff which is going to get into the combat discussion when you talk about speed of combat. And there is there's a lot of reason for this is part of teeing up like some of the explanation that I'll give you when we get to that point, is just the ability to perceive and actually thoughtfully navigate all of these different potential moments and experiences that can happen in combat. When you get more, certainly in action-based combat, but the more, I call it frenetic, and I don't mean that as a negative term. it's just um, it's just something fast and kind of a wild and unpredicted way. So when you get into more action-based combat, you get into a little bit more freneticism, which is fun, but it's more difficult the deeper you get into that synergistic and tactical layers of combat um, to notice a lot of those subtleties and those windows. And so that's kind of the balance we're striking. But we'll talk about that a little bit later.
Yeah, I mean, I like I especially like hearing about the AI and the changes, disposition, things like that. Anything, since Everquest Next and the whole idea of Storybricks, that's something we have always talked about on our show is how do you advance that forward. And so hearing things like this are it's very exciting. One of the things, there's so many benefits when you start talking about Holy Trinity and other things, and class, even things like class balancing. This is one of the thoughts I have for improvement in AI, is that you can also start to maybe one day tune encounters based on party composition. There's always, because eventually you get 6 months into a game, a year into a game. Oh, you're a rogue. They are useless. We're not going to, we don't want you in our group. They can't do anything. If you can start getting AI smart enough to actually adjust the encounter on the fly because you have a rogue, all of a sudden that changes. And so anytime we just start seeing these little steps towards that, it's just, I think, a wonderful thing. So.
Yeah, and that kind of thing makes an MMORPG something we're more likely to talk about, because that's a key point. I'm not very much into combat per se, but character interactions I'm very much into, and that includes NPCs as much as PCs. Yeah, I mean, it's just another matter of the challenges for the devs and whether we have the tech and the time to add those kinds of things to the NPCs. Because it would be great if a disposition could be these people hate wizards instead of clerics, or hate men instead of women. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff like that. A typical strategy is to go for the healer first, like down the healer, and then it's easier to take care of the rest of the group. But other NPCs could have different strategies, and if the more that can be added, the better. And it is seeming to me, because we're at almost the hour mark, and we're going to need.
We're just getting started.
Yeah, we're just getting started, which means I think we're going to have some future shows coming up in the next few months. So at least talk about it. If not, I'm still not sure how much I'll play it, but there's lots of cool concepts that I last week came across that are really interesting.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, well, and I mean, just to quickly say, we are at the point where these things are possible, and dare I say, in some ways, kind of trivial in terms of just when you have designed and built the NPC AI to be able to sniff for these kinds of things, then you have the foundation to play with that to a great degree. And we already have, for example, a mana crazed. Mana crazed is a disposition that I didn't mention, but that is one specifically where they will only we only, like, think of the Terminator, essentially, like that they are immune to taunt, and if there's in the presence of a mana user, they're immune to taunt, and they hone in on one, and they will absolutely not relent until dead. And all the while they're draining that player's mana, and every bit of mana they drain is increasing their own power. And that's a perfect example. Also, just little combat mechanics, for example, like NPCs having taunt, where if an NPC taunts you are turned and have to give them your attention, and you can't not do that, because you're taunted. And so just even little things like that, where NPCs can strategize through the tool sets they have, even in their ability to tell whether a healer NPC is nearby, and that healer NPC is taking, health at a certain rate, or has a health that's below a certain threshold, then they will know to begin to use certain abilities like taunts, like pushbacks, like interrupts, things that will serve to protect that NPC. So we're pushing hard to. I mean, obviously, you can over ramp and over tune that kind of stuff to where combat just becomes too difficult. But with the right amount, it becomes something that I think players will be able to intuitively kind of recognize what's happening, and then all of a sudden you're you know you're fighting just much more intelligent NPCs, and you have this host of different ways to deal with what's happening in front of you, and it's really exciting. It's really exciting stuff.
I mean, at the most base root, like I just would love to have an encounter where you're fighting something that recognizes you have a healer behind you, and that is who I should be trying to kill.
Yep. It's huge. It's simple, but it's huge. Yeah. You asked about perception. How long do we have to go tonight? Like, what's our time?
Really?
We'll go. It's up to you.
All right. Well, that's dangerous.
No, if yeah, we'll stay for.
Yeah, my little ones are now in bed, so I'm good.
What was? Oh, I was going to bring up because you mentioned it earlier too. One of my favorite moments when we talk about even immersion and feeling impacted by the challenges was the first time in EQ that somebody cast blind on me and my screen went black. I was like,
oh man, terrifying.
What just happened?
Oh yeah.
Who unplugged what? Yeah, those moments, and we can't get those back. The first time we encountered stuff like that, we can't get those moments back.
Yeah.
But it sounds like maybe we can. Maybe that is the thing that you're trying to drive back. Is I wasn't expecting those NPCs to act like that. I thought I knew those NPCs.
Well, and that gets into some of the there's the capability of NPCs to do that kind of stuff, but then we have our climates and our atmospheres, which again another tenant that flows from both the challenge and the immersion, and in some, I mean, really all three pillars are kind of feeding into our tenants. But one of the atmospheres that we have is darkness, like supernatural darkness or deep darkness, I guess is probably the better way to put it. Deep darkness, which is the kind of darkness where you can't, pitch blackness, you can't see your hand in front of your face. And then there's the reason we've called it supernatural darkness is that there's a kind of a resilience to light. It's a kind of darkness that almost has like a thickness to it, and so torches and other traditional means don't really do much there. And so though the opportunities, the really fun thing about a system like that is it gives you opportunities to both explore difficult combat encounters where you're relying on sound cues, for example, to like, where is the skittering sound once you fall into like a pit of deep darkness, or you climb down into a pit of deep darkness, because if you fell you'd probably die, but if you climb down, then you can't see nameplates, you can't see things down in that kind of deep darkness, and so you're relying on these visual cues really until something is right up on top of you before perhaps you're able to see it. But then there's also non-combat things you can do with that as well, where you're having to follow the footsteps, or you're listening for soft resonances, in the gems or the different veins of energy that are running through the rock, or there's lots of really neat ways, maybe not to capture some of those very first moments, but again, so much of this is about taking those and evolving them and embracing them more as like interactive points of immersion and challenge. And then you think of the social aspect where I I I I'm excited to play a game and to watch and listen to other people play a game like Pantheon, where the conversation is less about like what abilities and rotations I'm using in my abilities, and more about like, did you hear that? Did you see that? Like, how did you get there? Where do we go? That kind of, again, going back to that tabletop kind of feel where you are socializing more in your gameplay experience. And it's not like you're in an arcade game mode where it's just, so anyway. enough on that.
Actually, you said something in there that I'm kind of interested. You talked about climbing into like a sort of dark expanse or something, and I wonder what sort of things can we do to actually affect the terrain and the game environment in the interim? Can we put down, put down a stake and tie a rope to it? Can we put down ladders? Can some sort of spellcasters make like a lift to get people from point A to point B? What sort of stuff? Because one of the things I think of is not just the risk of like I'm climbing down into the darkness, but it's also how am I going to climb back up?
Well, we might be climbing up into darkness actually in Pantheon, if I recall correctly. From
that too.
One up and down.
Yeah.
So verticality is big for sure, and because of that, to answer your question, that can be done in a couple of different ways. There are a handful of classes that have abilities that can assist with that. So the rogue, for example, has an ability called Length of Rope, which will allow them to drop a rope that other classes can climb down. The summoner has an ability called Summon Ladder, which would allow them to do the same. And then those abilities, because this is an RPG, those abilities can be improved. And so the length of your rope, the length and the material of the rope and the ladder can both be improved. Summoner also has a summon wall, ability that they can goes from like, straw to wood to eventually, a extremely resilient wall that you can place in the environment to actually block NPCs and, control the flow of combat to a degree. But climbing is a bigger topic because climbing is an entire system in the game. And so before you even get to ropes and ladders and things like that, you have a climbing skill that you can learn and then will improve over time as you engage in climbing. And the higher your climbing skill becomes, the longer you'll be able to climb. You will lose less endurance while climbing, the higher your skill, and your climbing speed will increase as well. And it will be harder to knock you off. So NPCs, because climbing is a dedicated system, NPCs also need ways to deal with you if you're climbing. So if it's an NPC that can climb, like a spider or some kind of a creature that can climb easily, then they would chase you and continue to attack you. If it's an NPC that can't climb or has a bow and arrow or something like that, then they will attack you while you're on the wall. And then other ways that we have to handle that, but we want there to be risk to climbing. The risk is that, kind of like, again, some of those early EQ memories, one of the things that made water scary in Everquest was it felt much more like real life water, which me personally, I wouldn't call it fear, but it's definitely unnerving.
I hated ice in EverQuest. I hated that.
Well, yeah, ice too. Yeah, the slip and slide, and I'm going right towards an edge. I can't stop myself. But when you would go underwater in EverQuest, I remember in Lower Gok, you had to go underwater, or Kazakh Thul would be another good example where you had to swim down like the alligator area to get down, and you just didn't know when you were going to find air again. And so you made this decision of like, okay, I'm going under. And I loved in larger bodies of water that it was just a big expanse. And I'm not even going to get on the topic of water Pantheon because it's something I'm personally really passionate about, and it's a big conversation. But we want it to have inherent risks, and climbing in the same way. And so just like water, you're looking at your breath and you're understanding that I have a certain amount of breath and I don't know if I'm going to make it all the way. Climb is the same way. Having a certain amount of endurance, I have no idea if I'm climbing down or up into deep darkness. I don't know how far I'm going to have to climb. If I run out of endurance and I fall, I'm going to die. Can I get back? Yeah. Can I get back up? Because when you're falling, you always have that little bit of, I can let go when I'm close enough to the bottom, but do I have enough to get back out? Those are, and obviously we wouldn't want a player to be trapped down there, but your more roundabout way back up might be a lot more dangerous. So then you also have climbing equipment that you can find, different things that will further enhance your climbing. Because why have a climbing system if you're not going to be able to eventually climb to some pretty mind-blowing heights and depths? And the idea there is to slowly over time give players the ability to build up their skill, their repertoire, classes having certain abilities, and then actual gear that will allow you to get to some really amazing heights, and then all the discovery that provides. So
The very first instant that I loaded into Everquest, um, as I was loading in, uh, on my screen, I could see NPCs saying, so and so cast this, so and so cast this, so and so cast this. And I was so paranoid that my Activision buddies were trying to gank me before I even loaded into the game that I immediately started running the second I loaded in and fell off the cliff into water and drowned. And so
this was your
every
first
time,
time logging in?
yeah, this is
That's
my first instant. Yeah.
an amazing
And
first experience.
yeah.
Wow.
And so every time I leveled for the next 2 years, the first thing I would do is increase my swim.
Hmm.
Yeah, because I was not going to drown again. Far from it. You mentioned summoning a ladder, and there is a summoner with EQ Next. They also had in their concept of summoning an ability called unsummon, and my wish. So I'm an altaholic, so one of my alts I was hoping to be the world's master unsummoner. Do you have an unsummon ability for people to negate what summoners do in Pantheon?
Nothing like that right now. No. No. But now you're talking like on the NPC side. I definitely see. Well, you're not maybe talking NPC side, but that's where my mind goes. Is unless we're talking about a PvP situation where you could, but that's what leads me to the NPC side. So yes, like right now, when it comes to any kind of summoned item like a ladder or a wall or something like that, those things would be targetable and be able to be essentially attacked by NPCs. So they would break through the wall, they would destroy the ladder, something like that. But that could easily transfer into an actual ability that some NPCs might have to just
I know. I was thinking of a player character because if I could summon things, then. But EQ Next was open world PvP, so.
Yeah.
But I'm
Now,
just saying.
PvP server, then and so on a PvP server, obviously you're everything that, depending on the rule set of the server, then those items would appear to a hostile player the same way they would appear to an NPC, in the sense that you could attack them and break them and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
I am.
You're not a PvP fan, then, are you, Diggs?
So I am. What's the term I have for it? It's like it's kind of like casual PvP. So, there are. So one, I'm not even really a combat person. On my Bartle, in my Bartle quiz score, my kill rating is 0, which isn't actually true, but it's the least thing that I'm interested in. So I like indirect PvP, so I like defending towns. So if I see a bunch of players who are attacking a town, I like defending a town for a while, and I might enjoy doing that for about an hour, and then I'll want to spend my next 5 hours focusing on exploration or farming or harvesting or something else. Uninterrupted. So I have about an hour of time, which I'm kind of willing to PvP.
Yeah.
And then after that hour of time, I am completely anti PvP for the rest of the game session. So being forced into it when I'm absolutely not in the mood for it drives me nuts. But I think I will say, like, I'm a PvP sometimes person.
Mm.
And that sometimes is about an hour per day.
When you do the thing that you like the keep defense or the something like that, do you like the one-on-one combat in that setting, or do you like doing more of the kind of peripheral things?
So I'm a co-op player because I came into this playing D&D, and when we played tabletop D&D, you didn't have PvP. It was only co-op. I mean, PvP was extremely rare, and I never played with any groups where PvP actually happened. And so I prefer indirect PvP. So I like King of the Hill, capture the flag, I guess. I will stay at the flag and keep capturing the flag, and it's more important to me to capture the flag. So like death penalty, I let people kill me. I don't fight for deaths because flags usually get more points. So I'm usually at the top of the list for flags and bottom.
So
and then
PvP when there's a purpose.
I like indirect, and I don't necessarily like the one-on-one combat. I like objectives that I'm going towards or focusing on more so.
Objective-based PvP. That's probably a good way to. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, that's a conversation we've had a bit, actually recently too, with kind of PvP, open world PvP. Kind of went hand in hand with the death penalty discussion to some
I think
extent.
it was in that same episode.
Yeah.
We're talking about that quite a bit.
Because I had a lot of other discussions where a lot of the Ashes players disagree with me, but I don't see. I don't know. Again, maybe your discussion of there's a little bit of room for everyone changes that, but I could never get past the idea of open world PvP in an mmorpg being a successful long-term game. We don't have to go down that rabbit hole, but that's sort of my perspective.
That's a deep hole.
Yeah,
I'm a big PvP fan, so I'm coming at it from the perspective of I anytime there's a PvP server, I play on it. I played on Sullen's EQ. That was my primary. That was the longest stretch that I had. And if you remember, Sullen's it's kind of a no rules, no holds bar, good versus evil versus neutral. Oh,
yeah,
it was crazy. But yeah, I mean that's one of those. I think the kind of game that Pantheon is going to be, I think, could make for some amazing PvP content within a deep, vibrant, rich PvP world with a very deep faction system where you can, utilize NPCs to your advantage. I'm not even going to get into it because it is a rabbit hole, but I think separating those two things where you have servers that are dedicated for that.
Yeah.
And you have servers that are dedicated for the core PvE experience of what Pantheon is, I think makes most sense for us anyway.
Yeah, and I've kind of come around to the idea of a blend, right? So when you look at other, objective based. So for me, the line sort of comes as something forced or not. Is it forced? Is it forced on you PvP, or is it meaningful objective based? You can participate when you want to PvP, and I think there's plenty of opportunity for that in mmorpgs and Pantheon. Like I said, there could be a super interesting scenario set up from that. Our discussion tends
to not saying anything about it because it's something that I'm so excited about the premise of it that I don't.
Yeah. Oh, certainly. You can spill the beans here. I mean, we're a quiet group of friends. We won't talk about it once we go off the air. Don't mind the people in chat.
No one can listen to this.
No, I do. I'm not much of a PvPer myself, but I do think there are opportunities to enjoy it and have fun. So certainly, I'm not one if next week there was a, we're going to introduce some PvP here or there. I would not complain about that one bit. It's more so the open world forced upon you type PvP. Because the argument that always I get from tends to be more Ashes of Creation community thing is, we've not had one yet. We've not had a game, open world PvP that was just put together in a way that would be successful. And that might be true, but I tend to think back even to Ultima Online. I mean, these things, they have been attempts for quite a long while, and nothing has stuck yet. And I'm not convinced that style of mmorpg will stick, but we'll see. We'll get to find out with Ashes, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Something that comes to mind is the idea of even in a PvP, in an open PvP server, it's that there still has to be some vector for it. For example, they're in territory that you're home to, and they're from like a faction that you're at war with, that you can do as an act of defense, or they can engage you as an act of the ongoing war or whatever. But it isn't just run up and fight each other. You actually have to kind of declare, I'm fighting this person because of this reason. For something that's an open PvP server, you don't have to wait for them to kind of sign the contract to approve. But if it's something where it's a PvE server, they might instead negotiate rather than engage in combat. So it could be something like if you're, trying to gather resources and someone comes along, it's like, I want to contest you for those resources. If you accept, the winner, gets to take whatever's there. If you negotiate, you can be like, all right, whatever's coming from, these two creatures that I just killed in this material node here, you get a third of it or something, just, buzz off afterward. And so something like that could potentially be used to, allow for an encounter where somebody who is dangerous poses a threat, but it isn't automatically going to resolve in combat.
Yep. I think how you handle that opt-in is really important. If you, first of all, whether you have an opt-in or if it's, it is just happens to you whether you like it or not, but you do have an opt-in, then there's some interesting ways that you can handle that to make it compelling. I agree. Be cool.
Joppa, I don't know if you watched the video that I posted in our host chat of me playing Kingdoms of Amalur.
I did. I didn't watch all of it, but I did.
Yeah, so I'm normally a Care Bear, but in that game, I slit everything's throat as much as possible. I'm playing a rogue, and I love sneaking behind things and eviscerating them. And that game is the most I've ever felt like I'm embodying my class or my role of any CRPG I've ever played, and it changes my behavior because most RPGs I'm trying to sneak past or socialize my way past combat completely. I do that all the time in the game that the D&D game that I'm playing with Legendary Neurotox, and I will try and talk our way out of combat if possible.
Yeah.
So there was that, and then where was the PvP side? Oh, the Everquest Next example. They had the scenario that they were working towards where different types of magic would augment skills. So shadow energy would augment stealth, and since I'm a rogue or a druid, I usually again stealth my way past obstacles if I can. If I were going, so the way it worked is dark elves would siphon the life energy from dryads, take the life energy back to their towns, and transmogrify that into shadow magic, and the shadow magic would then power your stealth. And I was like, yes, under those circumstances, I would then go to the dryads and siphon their life energy. And if druids come and try and stop me from, it's not because I hate dryads. And if druids let me do that, I will happily do that. But if they try and stop me, I might have to kill some druids. And it's not because I want a PvP. It's because I need to power my stealth. And if those kinds of systems are in, yeah, it's kind of cool because it does change my natural behavior. And again, I start acting more like a character than who I am normally even as a player, not even just as a person, but both. And so when you can get those kinds of things going on in a game, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. I would say opt-in is important. How you handle that. Incentivization, like how you incentivize players to attack other players. If you incentivize, if you do, how you do, and then how you handle consequences as well. I think that's when you don't have any of those things, or you have them done poorly, then again, I've PvP'd for a long time. There are combinations that lead to much more toxic behavior and a much more toxic culture than others. And I'm not gonna prescribe what that is, because I don't pretend to know that, but I know that the opt-in to me is pretty important. Whether that's like more of a holistic opt-in, like there is a server dedicated to this, so I am playing on this server with the understanding beforehand that this is what I'm getting into, and then further opt-in, layers should you choose to do so, in terms of, is it a free-for-all server, is it a certain objective-based rule set server, um, and then how you handle some of those kind of player-to-player interactions, whether that's by being in certain areas that are dedicated to PvP or whatnot. But yeah, it's a big topic. It's a big topic
Yep.
for sure.
So it's going to take forever. Perception. I think you haven't gone into the perception system much yet.
Mhm.
Maybe touched on it.
Yes. So I'm trying to remember like how many times I've told this story. I don't know.
I haven't heard it, so
You
tell
haven't
it.
heard it, so there you go. So uh, the idea of the perception system. I was playing Guild Wars 2, and um, I was it's Divinity's Reach, I think is the name of the main city, I believe. Divinity's Reach sounds right. But there's a section of Divinity's Reach which is really cool. I mean, it's a cool city. But there's a section of it where there's this like big, like golden or polished bronze, brass kind of decorative network of like constellations and stars and planets and things. It looks like a big observatory. I'm like feeling it around here. But I remember running to that section of the city and seeing that and being like, this. It was one of those moments where I was just really impacted by something in the game I was seeing, and was instantly like, wow, this is really cool. I wonder what this is. And it became this very depressing kind of moment, because I realized I don't have a quest for this. So I'm there's the chances of me finding out anything interesting about it or being able to interact with it in any way are next to none. And I just immediately lost all interest and left. And reflecting on that, um, the kind of questions that came up is like, why is it that way? Like, why does it have to be? Why have we just so fully embraced this concept of like, uh, you know, I have to gather these quests and I have to have a quest log full of stuff, and I'm not looking at the world at all. Really, I'm looking at my mini map with telling me where to go and what to do, and the degree of which I have any interest in anything I'm seeing is the degree to which it relates directly to a quest or a task or some kind of thing that I'm trying to finish.
I lost. Oh, we lost Joppa.
Am I back?
Yep, we're back.
Let me
Lost any interest. There's no reason to. All we're focusing on is quests.
quests. So you're following your mini map, you're not paying attention to the world. And the other problem is that because they're all so fully tied into progression, like the leveling progression, then I'm not even really concerned with what it is I'm doing most of the time. I know there's exceptions, and there's some really cool quest lines that do really grab you, but it's just this recipe that creates a very disconnected. It doesn't do a lot for immersion. And the even simpler way to put it, and more of just the basic experience, is like, if I see something interesting, I want to be able to find out about it. Like you go to like the pen and paper stuff. It's another very close line walking with D&D pen and paper, and you've got a DM there, and you just say like, tell me more about what I see. when you walk into a room, like, I want to search the room. What do I see in front of me? What am I noticing? Like, that's that is really the impetus of it. Is I want the idea was with Pantheon, I want, if we're going to make this cool stuff, and if we're going to make this whole world where there's all these really amazing things to see, how tragic would it be to have yet another experience where it doesn't matter how cool it looks. Once I get over how cool it looks, it's like, who cares? Because I don't have a quest for it. And maybe I'll care about it if I get a quest for it. But um, and that's where you see so many of our systems kind of converging together from obviously the perception system, because that at its heart, the perception system is built in a way to, when you approach something, the environment itself is kind of the quest giver. And so this idea that I'm going to approach something that I'm interested in, and I'm going to be able to gather information about it as I do so, and I'm going to be able to, have that constellation in the sky kind of moment, and then by right of being there, I'm going to be able to engage with it. Um, and but you also see things like the climbing system um, factoring into that, because how do you reach that place? Well, it may be that it's it's interesting, but it's out of reach, and so you have these other systems that are there designed to kind of um, get you up to it. But even more so, a lot of times you won't be able to know what's up there until you get up to it and see it, or get down to it and see it. And so it's creating that impetus of, I know I'm going to be rewarded when I discover something. I know there are things to discover. I know that I can engage with those things by right of discovering them. And so I'm incentivized to explore and discover. I have tools with which to do that. Um, those things can come at great cost sometimes. If we're talking about, it's not only is it something that I have to be able to, let's say, climb to up to or down to discover, but there could be a harsh climate, or there could be some kind of an atmospheric point of content in my way that I have to overcome to get to this. Um, and they all of these different systems are and then just the way that we're handling like discoverable items, that's something that we've our pre-alpha testers have been able to see. But it's a very it's kind of it's not a cool name or a cool term, but we just call them lootable props. Just think, something like Skyrim, or that sense of, like, if I go to an orc camp, I might see a sword on the ground and I can pick it up. Or um, our scavenging system, where you can search through rubble and crates and different things to discover stuff. And so or just as something as simple as picking an apple up off the ground and eating it and restoring a little bit of health. Or um, there's or climbing a tree and picking one. There's all of our systems are serving that point of, like, when you play Pantheon, we have succeeded if you stand and you look out in front of you and you just see however much you can see translates into possibilities of places that you want to go just to see what's there. So
So, because I'm an explorer first, I intrinsically have that. So, give me an example of something that I would perceive and use a tool to help me perceive it or interact with it. Or
well, the first thing I would say is, another way to phrase this goal for someone like yourself who already has that naturally, is to only, like, inflame that
yeah,
more.
yeah, but I don't understand the concept because I already have that feeling when I go. So
But don't
there's
but don't you have that feeling, but is it substantiated? I guess is the point. Like, you may want to go and see the thing, but how how often do you feel like it was worth doing that on the level that really kind of resonates? Because if it's just something interesting and, yeah, I want to go and see what's over there, and then you go and, okay, there's a tower and there's this and that, but ultimately it's just up to see. Versus the idea with the perception system is that as I'm going to this tower, if I'm a keeper, so a keeper is somebody who is actually like a crafter. You can have a crafting system but not engage with it. We have a perception system, and you become a keeper to actually engage with that system. So as a keeper, you're going to be able to discover things that a normal player wouldn't have the ability to discover. Um, and so that's going to come in the form, number one, through these kind of intuition pulses, basically, where you're going to get a message. Think of essentially like Navi from Link from Legend of Zelda, or more fundamentally, just that DM kind of companion, where when you become a keeper, you are kind of connected to this um, internal voice that's really indistinguishable from your own intuition, but it's not. Um, and so it's guiding you not directively, but through uh, cryptic kind of, again, like how you would sense your way and feel your way through something. Um, so you're following these clues, these kind of cryptic intuition pulses as you are, or just, and they could be everything from just a little bit of flavor about something that you're seeing. Um, some things need to be interacted with for that to happen. So you actually have to, come and touch it to kind of get that impulse. Some things are just based on being in the vicinity, and then some things are what we would call more flavor, in that you're just getting bits and pieces of insight into this particular kind of mushroom or this tree, or how the wind feels in this area if it's changing direction, or things like that, all the way to um, what we call storylines, which is you're stumbling upon something that is much deeper and actually is kind of a way to embark on a greater story. Um, and that all happens through uh, the act of exploration and following these impulses um, as you see fit. Uh, there's some abilities and some skills related to keepers. One of them is called part the veil, and so you will gain an ability to kind of um, the best way I know to describe it is, have any of you played Shadows of Mordor or any of those games
Mm-mm.
by chance? Okay.
Yeah.
Scott, maybe you can help me with this. But when you go into it's been so long I don't remember, but you're playing as the ranger, but you can shift into that elven state and you kind of see very differently, and different things will kind of stand out to you in that state. So as a keeper, you will have this ability to part the veil, that once you have reached a certain point in a storyline or a certain kind of prompting, you'll know, okay, there's something more here to see. And so you'll part the veil in that sense to kind of uncover something that you might not be able to see with the naked eye. um, that would be one tool. You also have two skills. One is investigate and one is insight. And both of those skills kind of unlock different things for you. Investigate will feed into your part availability, make you more capable of kind of discerning more when you do so. Um, Insight is more of a skill that relates to more of your kind of um, just your ability to perceive things in general. So, whether you are able to get one of these pulses of insight, one of these pulses of information, sometimes you won't actually have like a high enough insight skill to really perceive what's going on. You'll still get like a recording in your journal that there was something here that kind of, you felt like there was something more, but you weren't quite able to really get a sense for it. And so there'll be kind of like marks that you can come back to later and check again, because that's going to be a big part of the system too. Is our faction system, the perception system, they play in such harmony with each other that there are going to be a large amount of things that you come in contact with and have these stirrings, if you will, that you're not quite capable as a keeper yet to unlock. And so you'll want to come back later and revisit those things, and constantly be gathering more and more information and experiencing more and more things based on your ability as a keeper progressing. That was a mouthful.
It was, but
That's great. I mean, anytime you have reason to actually look, the way you started off with that is almost precisely why I quit playing WoW. It got on this pattern of, okay, there's a big long road. I'll start here. I have 6 quests. I finished them. Yes, there's little stories, but who cares? It doesn't really apply to the overall story. And I go a little further down the road. But you're right, you don't pay attention to anything outside of this little hub, and then once you're done with the hub, you don't remember anything at all either. So anything that makes you have to look and explore and pay attention, I think is awesome thing. Sorry, Dix.
yeah, I don't really have that experience, again, because I'm an explorer first, so I am paying attention, and the payoff is, does it look beautiful? Does it look cool? How do these mushrooms look different than these other mushrooms in this other area. So it's the diverse. Well, I mean, in so many ways, diversity is the most important thing for me. So and I just finished. So when I got done playing Cataclysm, I was pretty much done with WoW. I had Pandaria on my shelf, but I did not feel inspired to open it. I mean, I had pre-ordered it and thought I would be ready to go, but I was kind of done just with the mechanics of WoW and needed something different. But one of the things that I started playing Battle for Azeroth in January so I could prepare for Shadowlands, because I can finally, once that comes out, create characters that look like me. That's an incentive to try and play. There is no faction system really. They're getting rid of the Horde versus what's the other one? Horde versus, what did you play?
The Alliance?
Yeah,
Alliance.
Horde versus Alliance. They're kind of getting rid of that rivalry with Shadowlands. So there's some things going on that finally interest me, but I haven't really been interested in WoW since after Cataclysm. But that exploration was really all that I needed at the time. If you go around and it looks good and it's appealing, I'm gonna go for it, because I'm trying to make a movie. I'll take screenshots all day. And you have different cultures. Oh, Zandalari trolls. I liked going through Zandalar because it was Mesoamerican culture, and I loved that mythology and that architecture. It's non-European, so yeah, that really captured me. I loved all of that visually, and that was enough for me. But if you've got an extra dimension to explore too, that's just more exploration. So if I'm parting a veil and going through a veil, I mean, sure, that's another layer. And like you said, so one, I guess a question that brings up for me is replayability, and you've touched on that a little bit with the
Dispositions.
Dispositions, yeah. And you just touched on it again with wanting to gather more layers from the veil. In general, though, there's other stuff. I mean, I think you would, from what I hear, there's lots of reasons besides just those two, or maybe several other reasons that we might want to go back and revisit areas instead of just once you, because what happens to me is not you've gone there and you've seen it, or maybe not whether there's a quest, kinda, but what is there new to do in the area once you've visited and explored it? You're usually in a place for several hours and you go around it. Why am I going to spend time there afterwards? For me, it's about story. So when I say when it's like there's no quest, it's like there's no story there. But
Yep.
and I don't know that I would go back without a story. Would I go back? I mean,
I wouldn't. And a lot of the reason is because not the last stream I did, but the one before that, I got on this a little bit, but I mean, I could talk about it a lot longer, and it because I think it's so key. But I think that's a byproduct of overly narrative driven games, especially MMOs, because when you start off and you're immediately conditioned, it's really is conditioning in the sense that you are conditioned to look for quests and complete quests, and the content is created in a way where they are there to support the quests that are there to be done. And so once you have done those quests, you are conditioned literally to almost like close off that area because you're done, and now it's time to move on to the next area. And that, I think, psychologically, even subtly, creates a sense of turning the lights off on older zones that you've been through, because there's just no. Now you may get a quest that brings you back to those places, but it in going back to do that particular quest, it almost kind of magnifies the problem, which is I have no connection to this zone. Like I'm here to just kind of find this thing and move
But
through.
the reason there's no connection is because there's no change. So maybe that's really what my question is the replayability. I mean, I guess you've mentioned one. One of the things that changes is the dispositions. The dispositions won't be static.
Yep.
It's the static content that's the problem. Um,
I think it's part of it for sure.
right. I've been saying a few times in the last month or two, Fippy Darkpaw is still there.
He's
No
still
matter
there.
how many times I kill him, he's back in the same spot when I come back to visit.
Yeah.
Um,
And I don't profess that we're solving that problem completely. I mean, I think that's a problem I think that's something that we're always going to be taking more and more steps towards lessening that and creating truly dynamic experiences. But you always also have to kind of be careful of, ruining the familiarity too, because I think there's a sense of familiarity that's also important to a degree. I mean, if things are changing so dramatically that you never have a sense of like, because there's part of that feeling like, go back to classic EverQuest when you go back to Kino Sills, seeing the Baobab uh, Millers and seeing, Holly Windstalker walking around and doing her thing. Like there is that sense of, and I remember with Cataclysm, that was actually a really fascinating kind of an experiment in a way, because you take these long familiar areas and you completely change them. And it's cool. And it was cool, but it also, I think, illuminated the fact that it's not it hard. It's hard to even put into words. Like it's the same way like when you grow up and you come back to where you used to live and it's different. There's that sense of like aching of, man, it's gone. Um but the reason I say it's part of it is because, and it is part of it, dispositions is a piece of that. Um our One of our game designers, Convo, he's got a lot of really cool ideas for like our day and our night system, and the way that nighttime has so much potential to create some of those dynamic, things where visiting a zoo during the day is very different visiting at night. Um, but another piece, and this is something that I could kind of gush and wax on with for a while, is the my own personal love for the Metroidvania idea, where when you're playing games that you start off and you see areas that you cannot access yet, and you just know you can't, but it kind of puts this little, ping in your mind of I can't wait till I can go back and see what's up there. Can't wait till I can go back and see what's over there. And um, I think that is a massive, massive well to draw from um, in MMOs. Um, we're so used to like going into instances, for example, and you can just do the whole thing. You just do it from start to finish. Um, we're not as used to going into a dungeon and there being whole wings of it that you can't get to because you don't have the right items, or you don't have. And I mean, I guess we're used to that in open world games to an extent, just because of the way that level disparity can create natural areas that are blocked off. But that's not super intriguing. What's really intriguing is when you start off as an elf in Fairthale and Pantheon and you see this ledge with a cave on it and this high waterfall that you just cannot get to, but you know that it's possible. You just can't climb high enough yet. And so when you're able to come back 20 levels later and you have climbing skill and the gear where you can actually climb up and see what's in there, then that's exciting. Now, granted, a lot of people will instantly say, well, a month after release, like all this stuff's going to be on websites anyway. And I think that's fair in the sense that we're not blind to the fact that there's going to be spoilers and things like that. But I think it doesn't change the fact that like your experience of playing the game, even if you've heard or and information brokering is going to be huge in Pantheon too. I mean, that's another thing I'm excited about is, you know, because there's no mini map, because knowledge of locations and how to achieve and reach locations is something that actually is going to be a fairly, important thing to be able to share. And there's all kinds of ways of with climbing and with some of our artifacts. We haven't even talked about artifacts yet, but like special traversal is a big deal. You've talked about ropes, ladders, the climbing system, warriors with their battering ram where they can break through certain walls. And then, our artifact system, which really is a very loving nod to that Metroidvania idea, where you've got something like the heavy boots from Legend of Zelda that allow you to sink to the bottom of the ocean, or some kind of short form glider, things like the hook shot, certain colored tunics that protect you from different environments. There's so many opportunities to create these kind of now but not yet moments where you're seeing places and zones that you want to be able to explore, but you have to come back later to do it. So that's going to be a big part of replayability as well.
Yeah, I like again that idea that we're kind of talking about in chat, that not everyone experiences the same content or doesn't experience it at the same time. Mm-hmm. I think is a very good goal and a good way to experience things, instead of this everyone kind of does the exact same thing, the exact same pace. Have you done raid X, Y, and Z? Oh no, okay, well let's go do it. This idea of it actually takes time, and you might have to go find the right person to get to do something, or you might have to take the time yourself. I do like the idea that you don't all experience the same. I have this really wacky, especially when it comes to storyline progression, like in World of Warcraft and some of these others, that if and Diggs will argue with me on this, but because he'll always bring up Dungeons and Dragons, but if the 10 extra levels you put into your expansion is basically filler to experience a story so that you can finally get to the end game to actually, quote, play the game, then why do you have levels? Why we're all experiencing the same thing the same way anyways, so why not just make it a narrative-driven sort of content? As you experience the story, you gain, whatever, you gain new talents or things as you witness things. So sorry, I'm kind of going off topic, but
well, actually, the artifacts kind of touched on that a little bit. That's basically what you're looking for. Is almost like that Legend of Zelda style. Like you find the artifact that opens the next gate, sort of thing, as your progression. Putting less of it, like the hearts and the armor and stuff. And Link does eventually get a little bit tougher over time, but the things still more or less are the same amount of threatening if you don't address them. So you still have to fight stuff the same way. It just gets a bit easier. Is that a little bit more along the lines of what you're talking about there, Phantom, for the sort of progression you're looking for? Something a lot flatter and a lot more, you get the gadgets and the goods to get by and open stuff up, rather than you get to level 70 and then you can do this thing. You get to level 80 now you can do this thing.
Yeah, I mean, the journey is just as important. I know everyone says that and it sounds very cliche, but it is. I mean, some of my best memories are not from when I was, quote, in-game raiding in Everquest. It was the time it took to get there. One of the things that I wish more MMORPGs would do, and actually this was going to be a question for you, because I know there's a focus on group, and obviously there'll be some solo content and then some raid content, but the experience, or at least from what I've read or watched, being more so for group-based content. But one thing I miss is, in EverQuest especially, mid-level raids. You have varying degrees of content that you can come to later on. You're with a group of 5 people, but you can't go into Castle Misselmore right now, and you come back later. Those are the kinds of experiences, the way things are not just, A to B to C, and everybody does it A to B to C. I like A to D to C to E, maybe out to W, coming back to T. Not so much.
Who's listening, anybody who's watching MMO history would say that, I think I understand specifically what you're saying, and I think anybody who's really paying attention would know that you have to build content, you have to build zones that have multiple level ranges in mind, like places for higher and lower level players to interact, for lower level players to see higher level things that they can't access yet, for higher level players to be going back to those places, able to interact positively even just through like prestige parading in a way, like there's that sense of like I get to show off what I've become, the power and the knowledge that I've gained. Lower level players are able to see that and swoon and long, for that. And I think that's a massively, massively important. That is almost like certainly a tenet of ours is to address both things. Is we want to encourage social bonds and not social isolation. So it's not a forced grouping game. It's just we want to encourage those social bonds and not design the game to encourage social isolation. And then within that, we want to encourage. We're building and designing our world to where lower and higher level players, mid level players, there's always opportunities for those to kind of come back and coincide with one another. For sure.
Yeah, another one of my experiences that sticks in my head and has for 20 years now, again in Everquest, was this scenario. I was a druid, so I played several classes, but druid had just learned how to teleport to a certain area. So of course, for money, would teleport people or items, whatever it might be. But I was this lower level character in an area of the zone where I could survive, I could help people, buff people, teleport people. But this one time, I had one guy that was much higher level, was going to a different part of that zone. And as a thanks for porting them, they handed me my first sort of clicky item that I've never had one before. Nice. It's sort of that experience, that I have a reason to go there, but so does this person who is much higher level, gives me a taste of what I could maybe one day go get myself. Mm. So it's just, that's
huge.
Again, with levels, it's an issue of numbers and how do you represent experiences. I was thinking of this earlier with the falling into the pit of deep darkness, where you're saying that we're supposed to overcome that by listening, but kind of the fundamental problem with playing mmorpgs is that we don't have 5+ senses that we're dealing with. So if I were falling into a cave that was completely dark, I wouldn't just be relying on my senses, on my hearing. I'd also be relying on touch, and balance, and all kinds of other things. I would probably, I would. All other kinds of senses or information would be coming to me besides just hearing. And how do you represent that in virtual game space?
Cool ways, I think, because first of all, if you think about just on the level of game accessibility, there are people that may play Pantheon that can't hear, and so you have to think in terms of like if you do something that's purely based on auditory feedback, then you've potentially created something that some portion of the player population can't navigate. So it would never be a completely auditory thing, but it would be one way that you could navigate. The other way could be something like having a keeper with you, for one, with that tactile, with the representation of the tactile.
So that's what I'm saying. That part becomes a representation.
Right.
And so it's the same thing with leveling. The leveling and the numbers there are a representation of that. It's the same, there are people, and I think Phantom kind of says this, but there's a contingent of people who don't want to have health bars. But in the real world, we would have many more cues about the health of an adversary or anything that we're coming into contact with, other than just visual. But the health bar helps us represent that kind of, and so it's just a representation, and it's going to have to be some kind of representation.
For the record, I don't remember saying that.
But one thing. So in a dungeon that have been thinking about, kind of is like what you've been talking about, Joppa. In some ways, I don't know if this is going to be in Pantheon, but as a rogue in a dungeon, whatever level I am, I'm going to try and scout, and especially as an explorer, I'm going to try and scout the dungeon and come back to people with information about what I found. And like you said, maybe as a second level scout, I only go so far through the dungeon, but I should be able to complete quests or tasks or whatever in to the best of my ability at that time. I don't. I should. We shouldn't have to clear a dungeon every time we go in a dungeon, and I think that is the mentality that um, we've been prepped for. Is that if you go into the dungeon, your goal is to clear it of everything, and the next time you're just going to clear it faster. Um, and it would be nice to be able to go into a dungeon and I'm soloing it. I don't need the uber loot from everything. Just let me complete my task, whatever I'm capable of, and maybe I'm helping you out with more information, especially from a keeper perspective. Um, and then, yeah, we can return later and do some other part of it because not everybody doing a mission in a castle is a king or a knight or a duke or whatever. We might be peons. We might be the scullery maid who's been asked to do something, and we can only go so far. We're not going to kill all the knights, but we might be able to poison a couple of dukes. I don't know. So
That D&D inspired creativity of thinking about handling situations is very much kind of at the root, for sure.
I do have a quick question about social skills. There's perception, but are there, like I said, I usually will try and charm my way out or intimidate my way out, flirt my way out of combat. Are there social skills at all in Pantheon?
There are, as part of the perception system. So a keeper is going to have a lot more options in dialogue interactions with NPCs. Now that could come at cost. I mean, that's part of the risk reward of that is you can end up turning someone in a bad way towards you. I'm thinking of one particular storyline in right now for the Dire Lord that that's the case. Where your responses and the way that you can attempt to manipulate a situation can go good or can go bad. So for the keeper, yes, and not so much with like non-keeper players, except through other means. Like we mentioned the paladin with their ability to make a hostile NPC friendly for a time. Which could open up dialogue for a keeper, which could, change that NPC's stance toward those players in that vicinity for a period of time, let's say. And then, other things like you mentioned, a poison or some kind of an elixir that can have the same type of effect. And, maybe it requires a rogue to get close enough to administer it or, something like that. So when it comes to social skills, particularly, a lot of that we're intentionally kind of folding into and weaving into the perception system as a keeper and the whole persona of what a keeper is capable of, and then other more gameplay oriented means to do some of the same things, just at much, I guess, on a lesser scale and more in a one-to-one direct way.
That sounds cool.
So we are, I think, close to running out of time. Actually, we're an hour over time. We really appreciate it. There's so much more that I feel like Diggs just doesn't quit talking. So
it's a really great conversation. It's really fun.
Yeah, as underwater zones and there's a lot of stuff that I will maybe one day get to with you in the future. Hopefully not 5 years from now.
5 years. Yeah.
I do still have my racial questions that I actually have to.
We don't have time because that will go for a little while. No, we don't.
It doesn't have to go. It can be 5 minutes.
We do 5 minutes. That's fine.
Yeah, because for the first time, as of this morning, I was able to create a party with in D&D Baldur's Gate. I was able to have a RPG party with more than one African American character in it. And when I was looking through races in Pantheon, I did not see many examples. That's just looking through videos. So I don't know what the character creator really does, but it's just the videos that I've seen. I've not seen a lot of African American dwarves or dwarves or elves with African American features. What is it the Scar? Is that the reptilian race? What's the name of the reptilian race?
Not reptilian there, but that's probably what you're thinking of. Is that more kind of bony, almost like a skeletal face kind of a race? They're not reptilian. They're more. I mean, I would probably liken their skin and to more of like a raptor or some kind of a
avian.
Kind of
Whatever.
They're kind of an amalgamation of the two, I would say. Yeah.
But the name is Scar. Is that the name?
Mhm.
Skar.
Yep.
They seem to have what was the closest to African American hair, African hair, I guess. I don't know what the actual texture is, but what is the possibility in the fantasy races to represent non-European looking ethnic features?
Well, it's definitely planned. I mean, racial diversity is like a big part of something that we celebrate and really want to have, because I don't think you can have an immersive, believable world without, fully embracing the reality of that. And that's something that we want. The simplest way to answer the question is more of a question of where we are in development, more so than what we're planning there. Even though it's good to make that clear. But so, and then maybe that's something we can get into next time too, is talking about spend some time on more of like state of the game type stuff and kind of, where we're at and where we're headed more specifically. But yeah, I mean, when it's all said and done, like this would be a game where you would absolutely be able to find the look that you resonate with, that is, rightly representative of more of an ethnic aesthetic. And the interesting, or I guess the specific response to some of the races that are more, I mean, I guess you could say the dwarves, in the sense that like their skin tone is kind of locked to because we're basically created from like a celestial fusion of ice and stone, and so they have this kind of like bluish hue. But even that we've already discussed, kind of opening that into grays and even more of kind of like the grayish brown area. But even then,
skin tone. So
it's skin tone. It's not features, and that was what I was going to say. Is the true thing here is that however we handle features, whether we do that through like a host of like specific sliders, or whether we have preset faces, that would be the other place where we would make sure to capture that. And even more so, especially when you get into races that have more of a fixed skin tone, that's not any that's blue or that's green or something like that, making sure that the hairstyles, the facial features, those things are all fully representative of that kind of diversity is absolutely the plan.
And I'm just going to end it with, even for the gnomes, like when I look at the gnome masks, I'm thinking, can I get African style masks or other styles of masks, Mesoamerican style masks?
Mm-hmm.
Those are the things that I'm thinking of. So
absolutely.
Cool.
All right. Well, I guess my only one last pin you down kind of question, just because I'm eager, is there any time, do we know when PA5 will be?
Soon.
I thought I could get something better than soon out of you.
Sooner than people probably expect.
Good. All right. Well, I'm ready to go. So
yeah, I'm super excited too, and I would love to do this again. I think, I don't know what a good cadence would be, but I mean, whenever you guys start feeling the itch again, just let me know. It'd be really fun.
if you give us, Yeah, because if you give us free time, I'll be hitting you up sooner rather than later. So
Yeah,
Okay.
and I would love it.
We'll chat in the channel here that we've got, and we'll find another time sooner. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. It was really fun.
yeah, no, there's a whole lot more underwater. Like I said, underwater class synergies, all that. So thanks again for joining us, and thank you to everyone who's been watching for the last over 2 hours now. This has been a really fun, good show. So we will definitely plan to do this again in the future.
Sweet.
And as of right now, these two will not be in PA5 with me. So if there's anyone out there that would like to have me in a group, let me know. As it will be soon, is what we just found out. So, all right.
Indeed.
Everyone have a good week. If you are new to us, we do this every Sunday. We typically alternate shows. So, for example, next Sunday will be Ashes of Creation show that we do every other week. So, looking forward to Pre-Alpha 5. Everyone have a good week.
Thanks, guys.
See you later, everybody.
Everybody.